Okay, Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to day 1 of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Before we continue, let us offer some prayers. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastatya Deshatarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Amagana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manabhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So let me just introduce our esteemed panelists today. They're all disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. His Grace Mahatma Prabhu first joined ISKCON in 1969. Among his many services, he serves on Sabha and is part of the ISKCON Hearts Initiative. Her Grace Krishnarupa Prabhu joined ISKCON in 1972, and among her many services, also serves on Sabha and is the Vaishnavi Minister for Australia. And last but not least, Anuttama Prabhu, also, I think he joined ISKCON in 1975. And among his many services, he serves as the ISKCON Communications Minister. And along with Krishnarupa Prabhu, he's one of the principal authors of the ISKCON Global Policy Against Domestic Abuse. So thank you to all of you for joining us today for this very important conversation. So I want to kick off by mentioning that earlier this year, February 2022, the GBC passed a resolution against domestic abuse. So I just want to read a short statement from this, if you don't mind. Domestic abuse is indefensible.
Let me just interrupt you there, Krishna. It was March 2020.
Sorry, March 2020. Thank you so much, Krishnarupa Prabhu. Okay, so from the domestic abuse resolution, there's a statement: domestic abuse is indefensible, illegal in many countries, and never acceptable within the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Any interpretation of Vaishnava religious or social teachings that condones, endorses, or justifies domestic abuse is rejected by the governing body commission. That's quite a power-packed statement there. And just forgive my ignorance, but it seems strange to me that we as ISKCON even need to have a resolution such as this. So is domestic abuse really a problem within ISKCON? And the floor is open.
Well, just from my personal, when I say personal experience, I mean, the number of phone calls I get from Vaishnavis who are in distress. And when I visit temples, you know, there's always going to be some devotees who will, you know, come to me and want to talk about their personal situation. So I would say that it's quite well, I wouldn't say prolific, but it's quite common. And the reason that not very much is done about it is because of the general stigma attached to someone in a domestic violence situation, where they feel very uncomfortable talking about it. They can also be very fearful. And because we're not really equipped as a society to be able to offer tangible support, we can offer advice, we can encourage them, of course, to go to the police. That's the most important step. We can encourage them to go to seek professional advice, like some of the helplines, and, you know, in Australia, there are quite a lot of them. but we're not set up that we can say, at least as far as I know, that we can say to someone, we can provide you shelter. We can provide you a safe place to stay for you and your children, because not always, but generally domestic violence is perpetrated by men, but by no means always. But for a woman, she may be financially dependent on her husband, may have children. So where does she go? And we don't really have that infrastructure in place yet.
Yes, thank you, Krishnarupa. I think I do want to come back to that important point of what is it that we as ISKCON and our leaders need to do. But coming back to this point of the fact that that domestic abuse is something that occurs within ISKCON, and it's not actually acceptable according to our Vaishnava principles. So I want to ask, why is it important that we actually have this conversation? And, you know, what are some of the reasons behind the stigma that you mentioned? Nitya Prabhu, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Can I just make an opening comment just in regards to your first question? I think you even used the word strange. You know, it's strange that this happens, or is it strange that this happens? I think we need to, as a global society, kind of wake up to the reality that whatever problems exist in the global society will exist in ISKCON. You know, there used to be a sense years ago, and the three of us you're talking to here been around a few years, a few decades in ISKCON. There was a period of time that there was no question of mental health. We didn't have mental health issues. There was no question of domestic problems. We didn't have domestic problems. There's no question of this, that, depression, none of those things, because we just chant Hare Krishna and we're happy. But the reality is, we're seeing through our older, wiser eyes, is whatever kind of challenges come to embodied beings, you know, people with material bodies and material minds living in the modern world, we are going to have at least a percentage of those same problems, and not in the same percentage. The question is, do we try to address those with perspectives in kind of somewhat enlightened, we hope, from a Christian conscious viewpoint? We should be more compassionate, more proactive, more attentive, more protective as a society than people who are, you know, supposedly less aware. If we're more aware, we should be more attentive. So I think what Krishnarupa said about, you know, domestic abuse, it's not that we're not going to have it. We should be that much further ahead in being prepared how to prevent it, how to minimize it, how to address it. So I think that's the real question. Sometimes we think we don't need to talk about these things because we're not going to have those problems. I think we need to reverse it. We're going to have those problems. Let's be proactive as quickly as we can. Some things we're still making up for lost time, and put procedures in place to help devotees. And don't be blind and think we're not going to have these problems, because we will, and we do.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very interesting point that you mentioned. That the problems in the larger society are going to exist within ISKCON, and we're a preaching movement, so we are reaching out to these people, and you know, we're bringing them into our society, and we're going to have to deal with whatever comes with society at large. And you brought up a very interesting point about our society and our culture, and I was actually just thinking about Srila Prabhupada's 7 purposes for ISKCON, particularly his 3rd purpose, where he states to bring the members of the society together with each other and nearer to Krishna, the prime entity, and thus to develop the idea within the members and humanity at large that each soul is part and parcel of the quality of Godhead, Krishna. And what it seems to me Prabhupada is saying in this statement is that his vision for a healthy society is based on the fundamental concept of inclusivity and respect for all, and bringing everyone together. So, and that we're all, you know, as parts and parcels of Krishna, we have that quality of compassion, of, you know, we're all spiritual beings equal on that spiritual platform. So my thought with this is what is going to happen to ISKCON, to Prabhupada's vision for ISKCON, if we don't start taking these issues of domestic violence, and by extension, gender-based violence, more seriously? Mahatma Prabhu, you haven't spoken as yet.
There was a lady that went to a prison and spoke to all the men who were in prison for domestic violence. And she had gone through she had been married to a man who abused her. So she told her story to these men. She told what she was experiencing, what she was thinking, etc., etc. And somehow or other, by hearing it from her, it changed them all. If they heard it from their wives, their partners, nothing happened. But in that environment, hearing it from her, the men started saying things like, I never realized that's what my wife or my girlfriend was going through. I never realized how much I was harming her. So it's like the first question you ask, you don't expect in a society in which we're trying to become pure devotees that this would even be a problem. It's like, you know, like Anuttama was saying, you know, it's like, yeah, we're devotees, you know, but it's all textbook. It's all in the book. A devotee is this. So if we're all like that, then we don't have these problems. And as Anuttama said, no, we do have these problems because we were conditioned souls, and conditioned souls are joining. If there's education, like for example, in Russia, if you want to get initiated, you have to take a course on Grihastha life. Did you know that? That's a requirement. So because this is so common, if the education is there, I think, as Anuttama Prabhu was saying, proactive prevention. We just don't think that way because we don't realize how pervasive it is. And I think we could save a lot of women distress if we educated them to become men. I mean, we've often talked about that. Like, let's have a course for men, how to become men. Because although domestic violence is about 85% male, we think it's a female problem. It's not. It's a male problem because they're the ones perpetrating it. And so they're the ones that need help and they're the ones that need education. So it's not a bad idea that we have some education for men. And anyway, if you study domestic violence and the psychology of it, it's very interesting how that dynamic comes out in men when they're with a female, whereas with their friends, they're very nice and they're not violent and so forth. There's not the rough, tough guys at the bar necessarily.
Yeah, it's behind the privacy at home, behind the doors, you know, like I know of cases where, you know, the devotee, the husband is exemplified, he's honored, he's such a nice devotee, but when he's inside his own home, takes on these, you know, awful qualities. And I was speaking to a devotee recently who has a male devotee, and he has worked professionally in that arena of helping men who are going to be jailed for domestic violence. And he told me that it can take even more than 100 hours, you know, 100 counseling sessions, which could be 2 hours long or 3 hours long, to even make a little bit of a shift in the mentality. So that example you gave, Mahatma Prabhu, with the lady went to speak to the you know, the men incarcerated for domestic violence, that they shifted. That would not be the norm. It would take a lot more. And devotees tend to make a mistake. They get confused between conflict in a marriage and domestic violence in a marriage. So if there's a conflict in a marriage, and, you know, we all know that there's going to be conflict at some point or other. It's just two people living in the same house is going to be conflict. But that can be solved by, you know, seeking counseling from professionals, helping how to communicate with each other, learning proper communication. But when there's violence in the home, it's not recommended for a married couple to attend a counsellor together. Specific trauma-informed counselling is required for the victim, and specific counselling for men who use violence is required for the perpetrator. So, you know, if the couple go together and the wife complains about, you know, my husband's, you know, uses violence on me, then when she gets home, it might be even worse.
So I wanted to come, you know, you raised this interesting point of how do we actually support victims, both, you know, the perpetrators, getting them help, and the victims themselves. And it brings me to the question of how do leaders in, you know, within ISKCON address this? What is their responsibility? You know, if you're a leader in a community and you see something happening, or it's brought to your attention that something is happening, what should you be doing, you know, as a response to the situation? And also, you know, as Mahatma Prabhu was talking about in terms of training, so what proactive measures can be put in place to mitigate the situation or prevent them from happening?
I'd like to start just on the proactive part, because I think that's in many ways maybe the most important, which is and it goes back to the earlier discussion. We have to get rid of this false conception that we don't have a problem. We need to come from the point of view, we do have a problem in some places, and someone who's getting into a relationship has to be very aware. You know, there's you know, love is blind, right? The common expression. But as devotee, it sometimes is even more blind, because we think, well, I'm a devotee, he's a devotee, so God must be blessing this relationship. Well, you know, it's not that simple. We have our responsibility as well. So I think the first thing is within our communities, we need to just educate our people, especially our young men, and maybe especially our young women, that there can be some very harmful, negative, violent patterns that can come out in relationship. And I think if a young woman in particular is aware of that, and she knows what to watch for, what the signs are, she may avoid getting in a very painful and destructive relationship. But if she doesn't know, there's just this kind of silence on the whole thing, and it's just kind of under, you know, there's this false premise that everybody has a wonderful relationship, and this must be just some kind of temporary aberration. But as you know, both Mahatma and Krishnarupa were saying, it's not the fact. You know, once the patterns are there, they're very, very hard to change. So I think that's the first step. There needs to be an awareness and a conversation about it. And frankly, in our communities, I think in other religious communities as well, these are kind of taboo. You know, it's supposed to be like, you know, Jews don't have these problems. Well, you know, evangelical Christians don't have, well, you know, we're saved, you know, we don't have this problem. Or Hindus didn't have this problem. Or you know, we're in a rich suburb. You know, the poor people had that problem. We don't have that problem. We all drive, you know, Cadillacs and you know, Teslas and Teslas and all. That illusion has to be taken out as the first step, so that people are a little more cautious.
Thank you for that, Anuttama Prabhu. Definitely premarital education, raising awareness on what are the red flags to be looking for, especially some of the subtle signs. You know, sometimes we may dismiss some potentially big red flags, thinking, oh, this is a minor thing. But I see Krishnarupa Prabhu, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm trying very hard to not dominate the whole conversation, because it's such an important issue to me. And it's, as you know, I give seminars on these topics, trying to educate devotees where I can. But just something Anuttama Prabhu said was so, everything he said was very good. But one particular thing is that the experts call it nip it in the bud. So when a young couple get married, and from talking to, you know, many devotees, they've said to me, who have been in a domestic violence situation, they've said to me, if only I'd said something at the beginning, maybe I could have stopped it. So the experts say, you watch out for the signs, because someone who uses domestic violence in a marriage will try the waters, they'll test the waters, because it's all about control and manipulation. So when a partner sees something that's not right, like it might be the first slap, it might be the first shouting, it might be the first hint of gaslighting, psychological abuse, etc. And we all know there's many, you know, levels of, not levels, but many different facets of domestic violence. If that person says, you do that to me again, I'm walking out the door. And that often really stops it. But this kind of continual thing comes on, because domestic violence is not a one-off thing. It happens more and more frequently when the perpetrator can see that they can get away with it. So that nip it in the bud is really important. And that's what, we should be educating devotees about. What are the red flags? What are the things that you're looking for? And when they come up, then you seek help.
So
I want to bring up something now that I think segues into this. It's super important. In certain communities, divorce, separation you're practically ostracized from the community. You're looked down upon and so forth. So if you're being abused, some women don't want to say anything because it's just talking about it is not, the leaders aren't going to listen. They'll think she's making it up, which she isn't. There's no reason to. And she may be shamed by leaders because she wants to get out of the relationship. So that's a real problem, to create an environment where a person feels like, if I try to get out, I'll be shamed. Or if I try to explain it, people won't believe me. So that kind of education needs to go on, and that kind of culture needs to be dealt with. I think, as you must know, Krishnarupa, how many times women who are being abused are told to tolerate.
Yes.
In certain cultures.
Even by their gurus. Even by their gurus.
Yeah. Yeah. So the education has to be all the way to the top. And unfortunately, not everyone in a position of power is educated about these things. And unfortunately, people in positions of power have to make judgments on things they're not always well educated about. And then it creates problems.
So you've all raised some very interesting points about the proactive side, the education before before getting into a relationship, or at the early stages of a relationship, things to look out for, as leaders, to be facilitating this kind of training. And then also now you've also brought up this really big topic of shaming the victim and what it means to create a safe environment for victims to come forward. And I don't know if we can unpack this a little bit more. What exactly does it do to, as a leader or as a person in any kind of position of authority, to minimize the experience, or for the community to shame the victim? How does it affect the devotee? How does it affect the community at large when this is going on and it's not addressed? Anuttama Prabhu?
Yeah, just almost as a preamble to that again, I think that, Krishnarupa mentioned this in part, that we have to be aware that the people that cause this type of abuse oftentimes are aware of what they're doing, and they're consciously covering for it in other relationships. Or they may not have the problem manifest in other relationships. I read a book by a Christian minister, and you could have taken out the word Christian and put in the word ISKCON or Vaishnava. And he's talking about, real life case stories of men who were the most respected leaders in the church. And they came on Sunday early, and they were big donors, and they were on the board, and everybody thought they were wonderful, wonderful people. They never manifested this kind of abuse of power and in these other relationships. So when people came forward and said to the pastor or to their friends or to the husband of a friend or whoever they felt somewhat comfortable to talk to, practically they didn't believe them, because it can't be him. You must be, nasty, it's used in a derogatory way. You must be some type of, emotional woman who you must be bringing it on of him. You must be nagging him. You must be. And that's what leads into this blaming the victim. So again, it gets as leaders of people in ISKCON, it's got to start with us making each other aware. It's like, moms kind of know what are the signs of diseases that maybe, or, other women don't know. But when you're mom, you don't have to be a medical doctor. You kind of learn, this kind of bruise is serious. This one is like, whoa, get to the hospital. You don't need to be a doctor. So our leaders across the board need to understand what are some of the symptoms and how people abuse that position and can cover it up. So we're already a little sensitive to it. And then that leads into how do you avoid blaming the victim and Krishnarupa wants to respond to that. I just want to put that out as kind of a preamble, because otherwise we will blame the victim, because we're going to assume that the perpetrator, well, it couldn't be him. He's too nice a guy. Well, sometimes the nicest guys are the perpetrators.
Yes, sometimes it's the quiet ones. I just wanted to respond to that, Anuttama Prabhu, that this also brings up another conundrum. What if the person who's abusive is in a leadership position? And I've seen an example of that where, there were apprehended violence orders taking out this person. There was no question that they were perpetrating violence in the home over a long period of time, but the person held a responsible position in a developing temple. And there was a big event that this person, the alleged perpetrator, was going to speak at. And the leaders asked the estranged wife not to go. And this was, I felt, very unjust and very unfair. And this does happen, I think, with some frequency. And there's something that we need to discuss as a society, that, what do we do if someone has a leadership position? That could be someone who's a well-known kirtaniya. I know of example of that too. Yet, they're asked to lead kirtans, they're invited to travel to temples, yet at home they're perpetrating violence, that their children are witness to it, and we know that domestic violence has such a terrible impact on children. So that's also another point. What do we do in cases like this? We can't, we can't allow someone who uses violence in the home to have a leadership position, because it's hypocrisy. And it's saying that, oh, it's okay. It must be the wife's fault or something like that, like you mentioned, if she's, nagging or something. There's no excuse for that. If the wife is being a bit of a nag, you didn't take the garbage out, why don't you pick up your devotee? Then the husband should just walk out the door and go for a walk. He shouldn't use violence. And that's why I really like the idea of having, couples before marriage, that they have a grihasta course. It's so important that they can learn all about these things.
Yeah, this topic of or the particular point of leaders and their responsibility to the society, going back to Srila Prabhupada's third purpose of bringing the members of the society and society at large closer to Krishna. And that, when I read that, I immediately think of Bhagavad Gita chapter 12, and because Krishna lists the qualities of one, that endear one to him. And obviously this is our goal as devotees, is to endear ourselves to Krishna. And specifically text 15, Krishna says, he says, one who does not cause any disturbance to or difficulty to others, or one by whom others are not put into difficulty. And surely domestic abuse or violence, that puts people into difficulty. So it's an active step away from Krishna on the part of the abuser. And as leaders, as communities who are silent, who are perpetuating the culture of silence and shaming, again, we're taking steps away from Krishna, because we're causing difficulty. And it's really, how do we again, we're going back to education, but how do we foster this culture of our real goal is to get closer to Krishna, and we need to align our actions, our thoughts, behavior, all of this with that goal.
So let's say I'm abusing my wife, and I know if I open up about it, it won't be good. Maybe I'll be excommunicated, maybe I'll be publicly shamed or whatever. What if there was a way that I could do that? It would remain confidential. I would get training, I would get healed. That would be better. We have quite a secretive culture. It's hard for a leader to admit their fault because it gets out. other people know about it. So we rather just be quiet. It's a problem. We know it's a problem. And in the corporate world, when you have a problem like that, they don't destroy you, they educate you. They help you deal with the problem. So it would be nice if we had a culture like that, where people who are having problems like this could come forward to their temple leaders and say, I need help, and get support for it without them being excommunicated or shamed, and in a way that they're healed.
So, Anuttama Prabhu.
Yeah, Mahatma Prabhu was talking about the soft side of the response. I just want to, I'm looking at open the screen with our official statement, just to because you asked this point earlier, what's the leader's responsibility? Just a few of these points for leaders, to understand that any person causing domestic abuse is in violation of Shastra and Vaishnava values. So that's, understanding the bottom line. More proactively, to be watchful for members exhibiting the symptoms of abuse. So to be aware of the concern for looking for people who might be in a dangerous situation, to take action and advise persons to seek professional help. Don't just sit back and hope it goes away, because it will not go away. I think we should talk about the cycle of abuse at some point in time. To appoint a community representative. This is kind of a local step, someone who's knowledgeable about local domestic violence prevention programs, like Mahatma Prabhu was talking about. Oftentimes, if not all the time, this is way beyond our capacity to counsel somebody out of. These are patterns that develop and go very deeply. Krishna consciousness certainly can help, but most of the time they're going to need additional professional support if they're going to try to change the behavior. And then here's the main point I want to emphasize in terms of your question, what do we do? To consider the severity and frequency of any abuse and determine appropriate consequences for the abuser, which may include, again, I'm reading from this ISKCON's official policy, which may include steps to ban perpetrators of serious or repeated acts of domestic abuse from participating in temple services. Domestic abuse will not be tolerated on temple property, either between couples or within families living on the property or those visiting our communities. So at least makes this bottom line, I'm not contradicting what Mahatma Prabhu said. We need to have systems that are going to support people that want to change, and at the same time understand that there's strict lines to be crossed. And Krishnarupa mentioned the devotee man who's the kirtaniya or the leader. It's like, no, it's in the policies. Actions often need to be taken that person can't continue having kind of role of leadership because the example they're setting and the harm that they're causing. So we need healing policies, but those have to be based on the foundation that it's not acceptable. The two have to go hand in hand. So I just wanted to refer to the document for that one.
Thank you. Sorry, Krishnarupa Prabhu. I just
I was Mahatma Prabhu, if you could send me that policy document.
yes, I will share it with you as well. And we'll also link it in the description to the video, so anyone else who wants to read it can go and have a look at it. But I'm this concept, the two concepts that Mahatma Prabhu and Anuttama Prabhu are talking about, that we need to have a solid baseline, like this is what we will not tolerate, and also at the same time have a culture of healing. I think that the challenge that I have with the software approach, while yes, I understand it is important that the perpetrator does get help. I think the challenge is where it's where there isn't any action taken, or there isn't really ownership of the behavior and an acknowledgement of this is wrong, I need to change. So, if someone's actually admitted that they've done something wrong, they're owning the behavior, they're willing to take the steps to make changes, then it seems reasonable, okay, to provide the support. But if there's no acknowledgement, no, willingness to change, is it fair to still continue allowing this person to be in a position of authority?
No, of course not.
No,
Of course.
and I just wanted to speak to something that Mahatma Prabhu said, if I may. Just that in terms of that softer approach, we know that it would get out one way or the other if the perpetrator try to seek help within ISKCON. I think because this is such a specific pattern of behavior, that it's really important that they get professional counseling, because you may have a counseling degree, but you are not trained to deal with this specific problem of men who use violence in the home. It's nothing to do with conflict in the marriage. It's so important that, of course, if they have, you know, a mentor who can help them or, you know, guide them, great. But generally they won't go to someone, they won't come to you, you know, the temple president and say, oh, Prabhu, what am I going to do? I just, you know, I punched my wife, or I, you know, smashed the door, or I put a hole through the wall, or I did this, or I did that. They're not going to do that. So, you know, I think with education, and men should really seek that professional help, because if it takes a professional counselor who's dedicated to that issue, hundreds of hours to have some effect, you know, your average kind of counselor, even if they are devotees, are, you know, going to be in difficulty. And I don't know if you've seen this, but in all of our temples in Australia, I put together this pamphlet called Love Shouldn't Hurt. And it's in all of our temples displayed, and it talks about if you've ever been abused, how you can help, what is it, definitions. It has the ISKCON GBC resolution. It talks about the cycle of abuse, and then gives a whole list of resources. So that's in all of our temples in Australia, along with a big A3 poster about it. So I think, you know, these kind of things are very important, that we do say to devotees, look, there is a problem, and it can be rectified. It just takes a lot of hard work. But as you know, a number of the speakers said before, keeping it, you know, as some kind of shameful story is not going to eradicate the problem. We need to lecture on it. We need to give seminars on it. We need to talk to devotees about it. It's so important. And then we also need to have avenues in place where we can actually, for example, if they're proven to be perpetrators that don't have a leadership position, that there are ramifications to misbehavior or cruel behavior.
Krishnarupa, we're trying to put together a brochure in North America, but nothing is as attractive in terms of people going to look at it, want to read it. You can also share that with us afterwards, because I don't think that brochure is in every temple in North America, and it should be in every temple. We just heard the other day, there's 1,100 communities or temples around the world now. So it should be in 1,100 different places, and it's not. So please
I'll
share.
email it to you.
Yeah, please share all that, you know, with us. I want to make one comment, if I can, something comes to my mind. I had a close friend of mine, this is going back 3 decades now, who was married, and his wife was pregnant, and he hit her, and, you know, and he could have killed the child, actually. And she was smart enough to know how bad this was. They ended up getting divorced, because the science is that the studies show, you can both correct me, interview if this is wrong, generally the man doesn't change in that relationship. Generally it doesn't work, unfortunately, especially we're in a culture that really looks down on divorce, looks down on separation. But I want to say this is kind of a happy ending. They divorced, and he went through anger management courses and domestic abuse courses and all kinds of different things for years, and really repented and really felt horrible, and got his act together, later married. His new wife was fully aware of the problems that they had in the past, and they've been married like more than 20 years now, no problems whatsoever. And the wife that he was abusive to, you know, they share a child, so there's, you know, reasonable relation between them as parents of a child. And she went on and she's happy with somebody else, so, you know, happy ending. But in that first relationship, generally they say that you can't change the patterns, which is a whole nother reason. Sometimes you can, but generally you can't. It's very, very hard to change the pattern of the abuse once it starts. So another reason to be aware of it ahead of time. And as Mahatma was saying, you know, we really shouldn't have a stigma. Definitely go back to victimizing, you know, the victim or blaming the victim. If a woman's in that situation, and usually it's a woman, if she has to get out of the relationship, that's another thing. The leadership needs to be prepared, and they should support her to get out of that abusive relationship. None of this stuff about, well, you know, you're married, it's your vow to stay together. Prabhupada says, you know, wherever Bhavatam purport, that it's a problem of the marriage is generally the woman's fault. Hey, wait a minute, this crosses the line. You know, what domestic, you know, whatever the intention is of that instruction Prabhupada gave, this absolutely crosses the line. And this is when, you know, we have to step in and be more realistic and go back to the purpose where Prabhupada talks about women need to be protected. We hear a lot about how women need to be protected, but how good are we protecting women from domestic abuse partners? We want to talk about protecting women. Let's start with where they need to be protected and not other ways of misusing that quote on what protection is supposed to be.
So, yeah,
Go
I think it's important to note for a leader, because I've seen this, that sometimes they just don't believe the woman. When we talked about this, and the research shows there's virtually no reason that a woman would make this up, generally, unless, you know, she's got some mental issue and she wants to see her husband suffer for some reason. But generally, she wouldn't make it up. So to not believe her and just think, oh, whatever pejoratives around sets around women are in a leader's mind, that's horrible. As you say, we're meant to protect women. So I think that's extremely important. From the woman's point of view, there's another problem where she needs protection. She's afraid if she tells somebody, the husband will become more violent. And so leaders need to know that, like double protection, right?
Mm.
And then she's afraid if she divorces and leaves the husband, he'll become even more violent. He'll go after her. So we really, you know, protection of women in this case is, you know, really comes to the forefront. And one other thing that I saw, which was quite interesting, it wasn't ISKCON, but they were interviewing men, both young and older men, and asking them, what does it mean to be a man? And about 20 men with different definitions, and not one of them said being a man means to protect women, as I thought was quite interesting. You know, being a man means to be responsible, tolerant, compassionate, whatever, but nothing about protecting women, which I just found that very interesting.
And
That's a very, sorry, Krishnarupa Prabhu. No, it's
sorry,
just it's a very interesting concept of, you know, what is the masculine principle, or as Anuttama Prabhu was talking about the you know, the verses that, or the statements made by Srila Prabhupada, that, you know, the purpose of our Shastra, the purpose of this entire movement is to help us get closer to Krishna. And we can't apply Srila Prabhupada's words in a way that actually makes it more difficult for any individual devotee to get closer to Krishna. Krishnarupa Prabhu, I see your hand up.
yes, I just wanted to say that in Australia, the statistics show it takes a woman 7 times to leave a domestic violence situation. 7 times.
Abuses,
You know, like seven incidents of abuse before she would leave.
Yeah.
Oh, 7 times of trying to leave.
Of trying to leave.
Might try to leave. The husband will either find out where she is, you know, and if you referred to that cycle of abuse before, and one of those segments in that cycle is the perpetrator feels remorse, and then he convinces the victim to come back. I only did it because I love you, etc., etc. And then the other thing that's really important is that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they tell the partner that they're leaving, and straight after, like after the fact that she's left. So of course she's in an unsafe situation while abuse is being perpetrated, of course, but confronting the husband and saying, okay, I'm leaving you, that's a very dangerous time. And also directly after she's left. So that's why in a lot of serious domestic violence situation, the partner will have to, like, you know, sneak away in the middle of the night, you know, and I know of cases that's happened where they've, you know, even slowly packed a bag and hidden it you know, and in a closet or under the bed so the husband wouldn't find out.
Hide money, make connection with us. That's why in the States they have what they call safe houses, which are places for women that are in domestic abuse situations. They can just kind of disappear to a safe house some other side of town, so the violent partner can't find them while they go through the process of separation. I mean, it gets really
So
nasty.
you both, sorry to cut you off, Anuttama, but you've raised this very important, several times this point has come up about what is the support systems, what are the avenues to be taken, how much we can do ourselves as ISKCON, and how much we need help out from outside, you know, professional help. So, you know, what should the relationship between ISKCON and local authorities be they the police, social workers, the legal system, these other support networks that are available? How should ISKCON build relationships with them? Should we be building relationships with them? And how should those relationships work?
Can I quote the policy again? Is that okay?
Yes.
This section's a little long. Victims of domestic abuse are to be treated with the utmost respect and care. Devotees must avoid the incorrect tendency to blame a victim. We should instead help a victim consider all possible remedies to the crisis. This may include seeking professional counseling, notifying the police, seeking victim advocacy, etc. And then victims should be encouraged to seek professional help through such outlets, American number, National Domestic Violence Hotline, etc. Where domestic abuse becomes known, communities and leaders must be careful to not side with the abuser, no matter who he or she is. It gets back to the leader issue. You know, well, so-and-so, they lead great kirtans or classes, so they must be right. We should be careful not to side with the abuser or assume that it's up to the victim to simply change his or her behavior in order to avoid the abuse. That's that kind of ignorance that's put on people we mentioned earlier. Victims must be empowered to make decisions that are best for them and their families, and know that the community and its leadership will support them. And then there's, you know, some links here to domestic abuse hotlines and other information. So I think a huge part of it is like Krishnarupa, you mentioned the abuse cycle, and you know more about this than I do, but I remember there's the violence, and then there's the apparent regret, remorse, and then what they sometimes call the honeymoon cycle, when he's so nice to her and he's buying her flowers and candy, and, you know, in our context, you know, bringing her mop or shot from the temple, whatever it might be, and she's kind of hoping against hope, well, maybe he's over it this time. And then he starts building up his, you know, the inner anger or agitation, and then something happens and he explodes again. And then, you know, the next day he's all regretful and she's all black and blue, or, you know, she's been screamed at, all the terrible things. So if a woman also needs to be aware, and again, it's not always women, 50% men, if they're aware of the pattern, then they can protect themselves. It's like, you know, if you drive in a car, if you know, if you get too close to the edge of the cliff, you're going to fall off. But if you don't know there's a cliff there, how are you going to protect yourself? So again, it gets back to making sure our devotees are aware of this. And it's really sad, but, you know, this tendency is there, like with child abuse too. I mean, there's parallels there. I'm shocked at how many devotees in ISKCON today aren't aware of or don't want to talk about child abuse, because it's like, well, don't bring it up. People are going to lose their faith because that was all 20 years ago. No, the dangers are there today. They're going to be there tomorrow. They're going to be there 20 years from now. We have to educate people to be aware of the danger. And in this domestic abuse, we have to, it's not, it should strengthen our faith to walk in a temple and see that, you know, avoid domestic abuse brochure. That should make us more faithful in the community, because they're intelligent, reasonable people that are putting these things out in front of us to protect ourselves. The places you got to be worried about where everybody's got a big smile and everybody's happy here. When I see people in communities like that, I think, whoa, something's wrong here. Something's really wrong here, because they're not being honest about what's going on. So I think that awareness and that honesty is such a critical step to have healthy communities.
And interestingly enough, Anuttama Prabhu, when I had that poster and those flyers up, one Vaishnavi actually came up to me and she said, oh, Krishnarupa, can't we remove that? Do we have to have these here? Because when we have guests coming to the temple, they're coming to look for a spiritual place, and then you've got your domestic abuse flyer up. And I said, actually, to the au contraire, it's actually very good for people when they come to the temple, they can see that we don't have our heads in the sand. And they really,
there will be a percentage of guests coming to the temple who are in a domestic abuse situation, then maybe that flyer is going to help them get out of it as well.
exactly. And it's important too that you have that poster and even the flyer also in the ladies' bathroom, not just in the public place, because if you're a victim of domestic violence, you're not going to be standing in front of that, you know, in case your husband or whatever sees you looking at it, but it should also be at least the poster in the ladies' bathroom. But I work with one, not work with, I have worked with and attended a number of this lady's workshops, and she works in she has a counseling service called Faith for Change. And she was saying that actually the work that we're doing in Australia, the Hare Krishnas, in terms of this domestic and family violence issue, she said we're way ahead of any other faith in Australia, because she said the other faiths that she tends to work with is that they just want to pretend that it doesn't exist. So, you know, she was really full of praise for the fact that we do have that proactive approach.
That's really amazing, because and I think what, you know, again, going back to Srila Prabhupada's vision of what the spiritual society is that we're trying to build, we need to understand what is spirituality and what is not. And we need to be clear, and we need to educate people. This is not Krishna consciousness. This is not what Prabhupada wants for us. And, you know, again, education and raising awareness is really important. But unfortunately, we are almost out of time. So I want to read an excerpt of a quote from a letter from Prabhupada, just to kind of wrap up the conversation, where this is, you know, about Grihastha Ashram. And it's in a room conversation, December 12th, 1970. Srila Prabhupada explains, whenever you add this word ashram, there's spiritual significance. So all the division, brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyas, they are all known as ashram. Anyone can understand ashram. As soon as there is ashram, that means here are some men, saintly persons, spiritually advanced persons live. That is ashram.
And if I won't read it out now, but because we've run out of time, but if you can take a note, or for our readers, Canto 7, Chapter 11, verse 28, there's a very interesting purport there, which talks about what should a woman do in a domestic violence situation. And it stops in the tracks. These are Prabhupada's own words. It stops in the tracks that notion that I'll just tolerate, it's just your karma. You have to be in this abusive situation, it's your karma, just tolerate. Prabhupada smashes that in this purport. So 7, 11, 28. It's very amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and we will definitely link that as well for the viewers. And again, you know, this really important point of, you know, not zeroing in on like a fragment of a sentence or a couple of statements here and there, and then taking them out of context of who Srila Prabhupada was, what is the mission that he's given us, what is the society that he's trying to create, which is a society where we can bring ourselves closer to Krishna and realize our original identities as spiritual beings, we are equal in quality to Krishna. We're not people who bash each other. We don't love Krishna and beat our wives. We don't abuse each other in any capacity. We are supposed to be loving and compassionate and humble to all of the living beings in this world.
Well, if I can, it just gets back to that. And just to add to what you're saying, you know, there's a wonderful quote. So we're having some reference from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur about Grihastha life. It's a little long, but one of the points he makes is that if you get married, if you think like my spouse, whether the husband or the wife is now becoming my servant, you completely miss the whole point of it. You're there to be the servant of each other. The husband should be very aware and comfortable. I'm entering this relationship to serve my wife. It's not like, emasculating me to think I'm there to serve my wife. She's a Vaishnava. I'm there to serve the Vaishnava. I'm there to serve my wife. The wife should think I'm there to serve my husband. But the power differential comes in. It's not, as we talked earlier, it's not just somebody has trouble controlling their anger. There's a real power thing, and they use this position of power. But if you really understand it, I'm a servant to my spouse, then the power dynamic is minimized. But if you get into the relationship, and we're a global culture, so some of the relationships in the cultures, the relation between men and women is not such a healthy one, in my opinion. And the woman's a few notches down. There's some power differential, and she's supposed to be, quote, subservient to me or something like that. Then if that's not what my expectation is, then I abuse that situation. So again, it gets back to education, it gets back to culture. And as you're saying, if we are a society based on becoming servants of Krishna, all of its parts and parcels, then we have to live that out. It's got to start at home. There's this English expression, charity has to begin at home. I think service and humility has to begin at home.
Mahatma Prabhu, do you have any final words to share?
Well, I think it was Anuttama who quoted Bhagavad Gita, or maybe it was you, 12th chapter, for one who is not put into difficulty. And there was a devotee that wanted to leave his wife with a 1-year-old child. And he requested Prabhupada to take sannyas. And in that letter, Prabhupada said, he quoted that verse and he said, did you not think of the difficulty you would be causing your wife? So we're not even talking about physical violence, just this is abusive to leave your wife with a 1-year-old child. And I think that's a beautiful point. We don't put anyone into difficulty. We protect women. How is it possible then, therefore, there could be any kind of abuse in this kind? And I think taking that idea and churning it and educating people on that, like Anuttama says, some people are raised in cultures where men are just kind of violent towards women. That's what they grew up seeing their father do. And it's kind of normal. I have a disciple, and she's from a culture like that. And when she got married and moved in with a normal family, she said, I never realized how dysfunctional my family was until I'm now living with a normal family. So sometimes you don't even know that it's abusive, because that's what you're used to. So yeah, it gets back to education, and education in our principles of what it means to be a Vaishnava, and what it means to be a human being, because sometimes we're too transcendental.
And people get confused when they think about the protection of a woman. It doesn't mean domination and control.
Right.
There's a tendency, protection means that person just has to do everything I say when they say it. And there's a lovely story that I think Tejas Prabhu tells, that he went to Prabhupada complaining that his wife would never do anything he said. And Prabhupada thought for a minute. He said, well, your wife is more intelligent than you, so why don't you try doing what she says for a change?
If I can just one little comment on protection. I mean, what or who are women supposed to be protected from? Well, first and foremost, from men. It's not like there's lions and tigers roaming the streets these days in most places where we live. So, I mean, who are the women supposed to be protected from? Like from men. And if the man who's closest to them, their husband isn't protecting them, then what kind of a perverse situation is that? And somehow we tolerate in some place the culture that we don't ask, or maybe we're aware and we look the other way, where the wife is being abused, domestic violence by her husband, and then we go and we give classes about protecting women. It's just, these are the kind of things we just have to be sensitive to and realize that we are way off these things.
Yes. And the situation is so delicate that there's like elements of being an active bystander in things like this. But it's not that you can go up to the husband and say, hey, stop hitting your wife. that just makes it even worse for the wife. You know, there's a lot of delicacy that has to be or has to be treated with great delicacy. If an active bystander, someone who's a third party, can see something, it's not to be treated lightly. It has to be done very, very carefully.
Can we just end what are the tips? If I'm a woman and I happen to see this video, I'm in an abusive situation, what should I do? Or I've got a friend who I know is in an abusive situation, what should I do? Or I'm a leader and I'm afraid there's a domestic abuse situation. Krishnarupa, what should I do?
Well, I would say, first of all, try and arrange a situation where you can talk to the person, or if there's the victim, or if there's a friend. If you don't have a relationship with that person, obviously it's going to be very strange if you suddenly go and speak to them. But someone who's a friend, who will listen and who will keep the utmost confidentiality and find out, are you safe at home? Are you okay? And, the wife may say, oh yeah, I'm absolutely fine. What do you mean? But if the person just kind of constantly keeps in contact with the victim and offers that support, if they want to go to the police, only the victim can file a police report. You can't go to the police station, or at least in Australia, you can't go to the police station and say, oh, I want to report, that so-and-so is hitting his wife, or I suspect is being abusive. You can't do that. It has to be the victim. So you can offer support there. You can say, I will go with you to the police station, etc. The main thing is always safe. Are you safe? It's like if you call up any helpline, and I've done that on behalf of someone else, their first question is, are you safe? And, even on their help websites, there's an escape button. You click on that and it will just take you to a completely different website in case the husband can see. So that safety is such a big issue. Even I went to one workshop, and they even have these special business cards that look like a hairdresser's card, but inside that card is the helpline number. And in America, I don't know if we have it in Australia, but in America, they often have these help rooms in shopping centers. Because in serious situations, the husband may stalk the wife, may, check the mileage, even have a GPS tracker, but everyone can go to the mall to do the shopping, but they can go to these places where, they're completely safe and they can seek help. So, it can be such a dangerous situation. And for young women who are, or even young men, when they get married, if they can see that, oh, hang on, this is not the right way my husband should behave to me, or the husband go, whoa, why did I speak like that to my wife? Then that early stage, that nipping it in the bud, can actually, resolve things. But you do need professional help. And as devotees, we're always very afraid of going to get professional help. Oh, the non-devotees, they won't understand us, etc. But no, they're trained. And of course, we do have many, devotees who are actually trained in these professional arenas as well. But yes, and that very first point that you brought up is that, where there's the macrocosm, which is, the world out there, and ISKCON's that little microcosm. But where does the microcosm come from? It comes from the macrocosm. So we're bringing all of our, our impurities and our baggage also within ISKCON. We never thought there would ever be child abuse. But, there is. And we got woken up very, very rudely to that, with so many of our children in a terrible situation. Same with domestic violence. We are actually about 30 decades too late with this education on domestic and family violence. And, you know, so many of my god sisters, so many, what they've endured is just so heartbreaking. And they had no information, they had no education, they had nowhere to go, and they were stuck in very, very violently abusive relationships. So it's imperative that all of us who have this concern, that we, you know, we talk about it, and we try and educate devotees.
So thank you so much, Krishnarupa Prabhu. That's extremely helpful. So, you know, just to summarize, you know, as leaders, we should be having proactive training, raising awareness of what are healthy relationships, what are the red flags to look for, what are, you know, when you're in a situation, how to nip it in the bud, providing safe spaces for both sides, the victim and the perpetrator, to be able to come forward and say, I need help. When a person does come forward, they shouldn't be shamed. We shouldn't dismiss a victim just because the perpetrator happens to be a charismatic person or person of leadership. And we shouldn't try to do everything ourselves. You know, there are resources outside of ISKCON, people who are trained to be able to provide support. So if we are not equipped as leaders within our own communities, we're not equipped to do it ourselves, lean on the resources that are around you.
Very well summarized.
And talk about it. If you have a problem, talk about it. Don't keep it within. Because you get clarity by speaking. And you hold it in, like you say, that cycle of abuse. You have to talk. You have to tell somebody, your mother, your brother, somebody. And that begins the healing.
And as leaders, we should talk about these things proactively, not wait till we know there's an issue in the community, because if we don't know, we may not think there's an issue in the community. There's issues in our communities. We have large congregations these days. We can be assured there's domestic violence going on in our communities. And we need to be proactive, you know, and the positive step, the positive ending of it all is through education, through awareness, how to respond. We can make more healthy environments for everyone.
Because a lot of men who perpetrate the violence, they may not even be aware that what they're doing is domestic violence. Domestic violence isn't just hitting someone or, you know, using some physical contact. It's the psychological, the emotional, the financial, the religious, all of that abuse, the gaslighting. It's just as bad. It doesn't leave bruises, but it bruises the heart and, you know, the psychology. So yeah, education is key.
And the result of all of these, you know, the abuse on both the victim and the abuser and the communities around them, is that it becomes more difficult to become Krishna conscious. And this is our ultimate goal, is to become Krishna conscious and take as many people along with us. So,
and we can't forget the intergenerational effect of abuse. So when children see domestic violence in the home, it will scar them radically the longer that they're subjected to domestic violence. And they can either, they don't even have to see it, they can just hear it. They also can grow up to think, okay, well, that's how marriage is. The girl can feel, well, you know, Dad treated my mum like this, so then when my husband treats me like this, it's normal. And I think Mahatma mentioned that example there of someone going to a house where violence wasn't used. They were really surprised. And then the boys think that, okay, the way they get what they want is by use of physical violence.
yes. So to wrap up, thank you again, all of you, for your time today and sharing your knowledge, your insights on this topic. This is day 1 of 16 days, so we will be posting a lot more content, more discussions. So keep an eye out for the over the next couple of days, and we will post links to the Bhagavatam verse and the domestic violence, the anti-domestic violence policy in the link below. So thank you all, and Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Hare Prabhupada.
Thank you so much. It was fantastic.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.